Greetings and salutations, and welcome, my friends, back to the Sunday Sermon. Bale, I am so glad you get to be here for at least the beginning. Thank you for the subscription, my friend. It means a lot. I try to give you guys the best I can do. And, yeah, buddy, this shirt, wearing it for the first time, loving it, loving it, keeping me looking stylish. And yeah, our buddy Bale, he's the best. We got to see him last week. That was good for the soul. It was good for the soul. Made me feel good. Made me happy. And got to support his amazing band, which is not only my favorite band, but I think it's Declan's favorite band. I think we can all say that. And yeah, the hat, the Tyler Chatter's bass hat. Oh yeah, we're doing it in full effect this morning. So we are here. It is season 3. I don't know how the fuck we got to season 3, why the fuck we got to season 3, but here we are. And we should all strive to be Dex's favorite band. But yeah, season 3, it's here. I don't know why, but it is. And yeah, so we're gonna do things a little different this year, or this season. What we're gonna do with this season is a salute to heresy. Now, I feel like I need to make a conscious explanation here. Make this very clear. Heresy and blasphemy are not the same thing. Oftentimes, Christians and other religious folks like to interchange those two terms. They are not the same thing. Heresy is respectable. Blasphemy, on the other hand, while can be funny, is usually centered in rudeness. What do I mean? Well, you see, heresy simply is disagreeing with a widely accepted religious fact. If everybody believes that Jesus was a white guy, and you say, nah, fam, Jesus was definitely a Middle Eastern dude, he would have been a person of color, that is technically heresy. But that's a good thing, because you're questioning a stupidly held belief. The other thing about heresy is that heresy can often lead to positive change. Heresy, to be a heretic, you have to be in the game. You have to be part of the religious group. And you're saying, look, I believe some of the same stuff as you, but some of this stuff I don't agree on. I think this is different. Yes, heresy would have to be, well, just a widely held. It doesn't necessarily have to be canon. That's the thing. You could have a religion almost that's built entirely on heresy, because if nobody really agrees on things, then everybody that agrees one way says everyone else is a heretic, and all those other people think they're heretics. Heresy is literally just disagreeing with what is an established canon fact. And if there's no canon, I guess it would be tough to have heresy without canon. But yeah, heresy doesn't always have to, like as I used with my, illustration about Christ's skin color. Heresy doesn't have to be negative. Heresy doesn't have to be bad. Heresy can just be, hey, I want to get this right, and I think you guys are wrong. Heresy isn't generally rooted in being mean-spirited or attempting to destroy the faith. Heresy is trying to get details right. The Protestant Reformation has entered the chat. Whereas blasphemy is insulting. Blasphemy, you're attempting to mock a religion. Blasphemy, you're basically shitting on somebody's deeply held religious beliefs. And we don't do that here. We like to joke, we like to have fun, but blasphemy is, generally speaking, mean-spirited and kind of rude, and that is not how we roll here on the Sunday Sermon. So we are heretics, not blasphemers, okay? Because I think there's a lot of good to be gained from Christianity, from Muslim. There's a lot of good. Anybody tells you it's all bad, they're just being a dick. Let's just be honest. They're just being a dick. Oh, I say blasphemous things. There's no doubt about it. But usually I'm joking around. and I'm making light of something. And honestly, most of my blasphemy is truly rooted in heresy. It's that I disagree with an interpretation of something. You could technically say that this entire Sunday sermon series is, some people would call it blasphemous. I prefer to think of it as heresy. I believe in the giant space dragon. I think that El loves us all and wants us to be good, happy people and be productive and take care of each other. And that is my heresy. And if that makes me a heretic, yes, that is a perfect way to put it, Bale. All blasphemy is heresy, but not all heresy is blasphemous. That's a great way to put it. So, one of the things we're going to do this season is each week we are going to salute a famous heretic. Someone who said, this isn't right, and I'm willing to put my nuts on the line for it. We are going to look at these guys. We're going to go, what was the manner of their heresy? Was it that big of a deal? What happened because of it? And why are they important to us? Why are they cool? That's what we're going to talk about this year. And then we're going to do more fun Bible stories. We also, if you saw in the cord, I stated that we are going to eschew the Bible for most of this season. We're going to get into the Apocrypha. We're going to get into the Gnostic Gospels. We're going to get into the Book of Mormon. We're going to get into just all kinds of stuff. We're going to read the Quran. We're going to step outside of our comfort zone. For 2 seasons, we've been in our comfort zone, and part of that is because that's my comfort zone. I was raised on the Bible. I know the Bible in and out. I'm very comfortable talking about passages. I can relate things to it. I've read a lot of commentary on it. But I say, you know what? It's time to step outside of our comfort zone. We're going to be equal opportunity offenders. We're going to challenge everybody else too. And we're going to try to bring them under our big fucking umbrella here. We're going to try to unify. We're looking for a unified theory of the space dragon, folks. We don't want this to just be a Christian thing. We want Muslims on board. We want Jews on board. We want Mormons on board. We'll take anybody under this umbrella. It's a big tent. We can fit everybody in with us. So I want everybody to come. Okay, yeah, I'll be all right. Now you've called me out on it there, Bill. I don't really want Church of Scientology people here. They're fucking weird. And not to mention, to be part of that church, you have to be part of the bourgeoisie, which would naturally make you our enemy here on this show. So we are the show of the proletariat. So, thank you all for being here. Stanley, shut up. And let us dive in to our first entry into Reverend Riv's Hall of Heretic Heroes. These are people that were heretics that we feel like they really did something important. Seize the means of Thetan. Oh, that's good. Alright, so, moving right along. So, what is a heretic? It's a person believing in or practicing religious heresy. A person holding an opinion that is odds what is generally accepted. That's it. That's all it means. If you disagree with a very common belief. I think it's important to point out that heresy is pretty unique to Catholics. You go to 100 Baptist churches and you ask their pastor what they believe. You will get 100 slightly different answers. This one might be a Calvinist. This one might be a 5-star Calvinist versus a 4-star Calvinist. This one might believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. This one might believe in a post-tribulation rapture. All these different little interpretations. Baptists, most Protestants in general, most religions don't tend to get caught up in that stuff. Mainly because they don't have a codified, verified, this is the fucking rules to every little detail. The Catholic Church, well, they have that. They've got the Pope, and if he says it, it is, and it goes all the way down, it trickles all the way down. They've got every little I dotted, every T crossed, and if you disagree with any of that shit, you are technically a heretic. It's a big Catholic thing, not as big with others. I feel like that's important because it shows a lack of flexibility, and it also shows a lack of understanding. if you can't look at something as nebulous as religion and say, there might be more interpretations than just mine, you're a narrow-minded dick. It's just that simple. Anybody who tells you they understand it, they've got it all figured out, full of shit. Don't listen to that person. That's my biggest beef with the Catholic Church, honestly, aside from like the raping children, because that's also that's kind of a big deal. But other than that, oh, the Catholics have a project manager. They do. They probably have like 12, and they're probably fucking a kid somewhere. All right, so now that we know what a heretic is, let's talk about our first guy. The first guy that's getting into the hall, that would be the homie Giordano Bruno. This guy embodies heretical thought in... Whoop. Did I lose my audio? No, I didn't. I don't know why I thought I did, but I didn't. Okay. This guy embodies heretical thought. This guy is as the heretics. That's why we're starting with him. This guy... Yeah. Like, I don't even know how to put it. This guy... It wasn't just that he would... But as we're going to find out, this guy wasn't just a heretic. He like, doubled down on it. And it didn't work out real well for him in the end. But he is our first member of the heretic, Hall of Heroes. He was a triple threat heretic. Now, what do I mean by a triple threat heretic? He challenged the Catholic Church on all fronts. He said, you're wrong about religion. You're wrong about regular everyday life. And by the way, you don't know shit about science either. He called them out. Giordano Bruno was a badass. This statue is in Italy, and it's one of the things I want to go see. It's a place I want to go. I want to go pay my respects to this guy, because this guy, ladies and gentlemen, you think I can be a dick? You have no idea. Let's dive in. All right. So, this tall drink of water was born in Nola, Italy, 1548. If you're a fan of the Punic Wars like I am, Nola, very important town. The one town that Hannibal couldn't conquer despite multiple attempts. He tried 3 times to conquer Nola, couldn't do it. He died. And so he did not die. That should say 1600. I apologize for the typo. He did not live to be 152 years old. He died in 1600, not 1500. My bad. Oh, we're starting off good. All right. He became a Dominican friar at the age of 17. Dominicans obviously were known for education. They taught a lot. They were very learned men. He joined the crew. No, we're not getting into that. Methuselah did not live to be 958 years old. This asshole did not live to be 152. And he was an asshole. He's my kind of asshole. After 11 years of conflict with the church over his obsession with free thought, he left his order to wander the country. Yeah, pretty much from day one, his big beef with the Catholic Church was that he was kind of that guy, you all know this guy, that's kind of a dick and goes, I'm just asking questions. That was Giordano Bruno. He was just asking questions. But his thing was he didn't think that anything should be off limits from questions. He was asking all the questions, and he wanted to know why people didn't want him to ask questions. And the Catholic Church, as we all know, is not a fan of people asking questions. So he was at odds with them real early on, and it never stopped. He just continually poked the bear. Love this guy. Yeah, everywhere he went, stories same time. He would go to an area, begin teaching and asking his questions. He would get the protection of a local ruler, a small-time king or maybe a governor in the area would say, hey, you're okay. I'm not going to let the church fuck with you. You do what you want to do. And then eventually he would push it too far. Then he would disagree with somebody. He was famous for, if he disagreed with you, he wasn't just going to tell you he disagreed with you. He was going to tell everyone he disagreed with you. And he would publish a book calling you a dipshit and telling everyone how dumb you were. And I'm not exaggerating that. Giordano Bruno, one of the things that really cheesed people off about him the most was he did not mince words. He didn't just tell you he disagreed with you. He told you he thought you were stupid, and that any person with a brain would see things from his point of view. He was brusque, he was curt, and he was not. He didn't care whose toes he stepped on. And so eventually, he would push it too far and have to leave the area he was in and go somewhere else. That was this guy. Okay? Just constantly, this guy was a proverbial line stepper. Didn't care who he pissed off. So what was the nature of his heresy? Well, let's look into what got him in trouble. Well, he expanded on the Copernican model of a heliocentric universe. That's right. He thought that the sun was the center of our solar system. He was also the very first astronomer we know of to state that the universe was infinite. That was the one that one really cheesed off the church. He said the Earth is not the center of the universe. It's not even the center of our solar system. The sun is. And he was one of the first people to say, I think all those stars out there, I think those are other suns. And I think that those suns have their own planets that orbit them, and there could possibly be life out there. This huge no-no. Why? Because the Bible doesn't say it. So therefore, it would basically mean there's a whole creation story for God creating these other places that's not in the Bible. And, of course, if there's knowledge that's not in the Bible, that weakens the Catholic Church's position. Because if there's knowledge that isn't in the Bible, then the Catholic Church doesn't have a monopoly on knowledge. Because if you remember, at this point in time, people are still forbidden from reading the Bible themselves. They are told you do not understand the Bible. The Bible is only to be interpreted by priests and, folks within the church. So if you claim that all knowledge is in there, and you're the only ones who are allowed to read the knowledge, that's pretty much a done deal for a power move. He taught that the stars were suns. Like I said, he also formed the basis for the innumerable worlds theory. That there could be billions of... This guy came up with that 500 years ago. He maintained that the Bible held value for its moral teachings, but that its cosmological implications were flat out wrong. Again, the next book in the Bible is called Star Trek. Yeah, he basically taught this, that the Bible was great for morals, that it was not where you should get your ideas about the motion of the planet. Celestial mechanics are not something that were covered in the Bible, according to Giordano Bruno. Now, of course, everybody would go, well, fucking obviously, everybody knows that. Not 1578. He taught that form and matter were intimately united. And he was implying the unity of all substance. Now we know. You've heard people say that, like, oh, you're made out of stars, and so is garbage. You all used to be stardust. This guy figured that shit out 500 years ago. He wasn't sure exactly how it worked, but he understood that there wasn't, like, people weren't made out of different shit than anything else, that we all came from the same cosmic stew. Again, way ahead of his time. He also, this one really pissed off the church, he wrote that religion was necessary to govern ignorant people, but that philosophy was for those who were smart enough to control themselves and govern others. Now, that bears a little talk. What was he saying? Is really interesting what he was saying there. What he was saying is that the good and bad and getting into heaven and all of that stuff, that was necessary as a carrot to dangle to govern the masses. And that your average person in his time needed a way to be controlled because they weren't intelligent enough to govern themselves. So the church was there to steward them along. But he felt that if you were the people in the church, his point was like, you guys don't really believe this, right? Like, you guys don't really believe what we're saying, right? We're saying that to control these people because they need to be controlled. They'll hurt themselves and each other if we don't. But you guys don't actually buy this, right? Like, we should be worried about how can we convince people to not only stay under control, but to be better people. And that's why he thought philosophy was so important. Is he really felt that we should be focusing on how to make people more just, more moral, better people, not how do we get to heaven? And what if God sends us to hell? And what about all these little minutia? He didn't figure that was important. He kind of assumed that everybody knew that was horseshit. You could see why the Catholic Church was not a fan of this guy. Like, he's trotting all over their stuff. So yeah, not fans of what Bruno was doing here. That wasn't even the spicy shit. Now, because what I think is important is this is something that's misrepresented by a lot of scientists, and it bugs me. You go ask just about any person who's dedicated their life to science, and they will list Giordano Bruno as a hero of theirs. And they'll say that he was killed because he stood up for science. That's not why they killed Giordano Bruno. They weren't happy about all that shit I just listed off. They weren't happy about it at all. That's not why he was killed as a heretic. This is why he was killed as a heretic. He stated that faith as a means of salvation was nonsense, and that the works that a man does are far more important than his beliefs. Yeah. The whole have faith in the church and it'll get you to heaven, do what the church says. Yeah, right here, he is thumbing his nose at that and saying, what's actually important is what you do, not what you believe. Again, completely undermining the power of the church. He stated that the idea of an individual soul was ridiculous. Instead, he posited that we are all connected, part of a universal soul. His idea was that all of us do have a soul, but that soul is connected to every other soul on the planet. And that's why we feel things like love and compassion towards people we don't even know. And that we should be striving to unite all those souls together, because that's the only way you actually find God, is to reunite all those souls into the part of, to the cosmic soul. He maintained that all religions should interact harmoniously through peaceful exchange of ideas with the common goal of bringing peace and happiness to mankind. Yeah, like right here, this one. Again, he was flat out saying there's no right religion. Religion is to control the people that need to be controlled, but that the people in charge of religion should be getting together, that the Muslims should be getting together with the Catholics and with the Protestants, and they should all be talking together about ways to make all of their people's lives better, ways to get people to behave in better, to improve outcomes, to improve the life of mankind. That's what this guy was about. And that the idea that one religion was right and one religion was wrong was just corny to him. He theorized that a form of reincarnation was possible, as his universal soul idea that meant that we would constantly recycle our energy in the search of enlightenment. His thought was basically, you lived as a person if you got it, if you found the God within, if you understood the universal soul and that all of mankind is connected, that when you died, you would be absorbed back into God. Very similar to the Jewish belief system. That, that's why we crave God, is we're a part of God and we need to be reabsorbed back into him. And that true agony, true punishment, true pain is separation from God. And that if you did it wrong and you don't understand the universal soul idea and all that, then when you die, you just come back again. And you keep doing that until you get it right. And when you get it right, you're reabsorbed into the universal soul and you're at peace. Again, this is not making Catholics happy. He also, this one was the kicker, he said that eternal damnation was not real and that the Trinity did not exist as the church taught it. That's right. He said hell isn't real. His idea? Well, it's, something that Christians have wrestled with and come up with bullshit answers to for all of time. How could a just God send anyone to eternal damnation? Bruno said, I agree. How could a just God do that? I don't think he does that. He said, you might need to be punished for a while, but nobody could ever deserve eternal punishment. That would deny that part of the soul from being absorbed back into God. He said that doesn't make sense. He also, his beef with the Trinity was that, in his mind, them being three in one didn't make any sense to him, as it doesn't make sense to most rational people. And he believed that God was God. And God could have a son. He could create a son for himself, and that son would be Jesus. But that Jesus wouldn't be God. It was the Son of God. Like, my sons aren't me. They're of me. They share, approximately 50% of my DNA, but they're not me. And that the Holy Spirit, Bruno said he didn't know if it was created by Jesus or it was created by God. But again, it was not God. So actually, it sounds like the only one who's not full of shit here is Giordano Bruno. Guy was great, and no one listened to him. Well, they finally had enough of Giordano Bruno running around saying all this stuff. So, we get to the how'd that work out for him segment of our heresy. Well, he bounced around, and eventually he couldn't find anybody that wanted to stand up to the church on his behalf. He had alienated everybody. Because one thing that I think it's important to note about Bruno, while all of his ideas are awesome, Giordano Bruno, every historical account we have of him, even from people who were fans of his, said that he was a bit of a dick. And that he was very blunt with, I'm right, you're wrong, stop talking. And he also he was loud. He was real loud. Many people had somewhat heretical beliefs in this time. He was louder than all of them. He was walking around with a bullhorn telling everyone how wrong the Catholic Church was. One of the other things that's really cool about Bruno, he apparently had an incredible memory. Could memorize entire just tomes of text and then recite it perfectly. He developed, I don't know how many of you have read the books from the Hannibal Lecter books from Thomas Harris, the Silence of the Lambs series. But in it, they talk about the Mind Palace, and the reason Hannibal Lecter knows everything he knows is because he builds a Mind Palace, and it's a memory technique that Bruno invented. Well, a rich patron had hired him to teach him that because this rich patron was convinced that Bruno was using sorcery to have the memory like he did. That was not what Bruno was doing. Bruno was not using sorcery. Bruno just understood this Mind Palace memory trick. But this rich patron couldn't learn it. So he assumed that Bruno was holding out on him, not that he just wasn't as smart as GB. So he turned him over to the Catholic authorities. This guy had been, kind of helping Bruno out, hide out. Well, he turned him over. His trial lasted 7 years. And it wasn't really a trial, it was more of a negotiation. For 7 years, the Catholic Church asked him to pull back his teachings. Just say, I didn't really mean that stuff. That is what they wanted. And the church did not want to execute this guy. He was well respected by a lot of people. They knew that his science was good. They didn't like it, but this was at a point where the Catholic Church was starting to realize that the Earth being the center of the universe was wrong and that the heliocentric model was correct. But they couldn't just come out and say it. They were trying to figure out a way to kind of slide their teachings in and not look like they had been full of shit for all these many years. And he was not helping because he was being very loud that they were wrong. So for 7 years they negotiated and would say, just say that you were wrong. No. Just say you were wrong. No. They scaled back how many things they wanted him to say he was wrong about. They eventually took it that he could say whatever he wanted about the scientific stuff, but he had to renounce his views on eternal damnation not existing and the Trinity not existing. Bruno's response was that, everything he said was theoretical and that he didn't know if it was true or not, that that was his interpretation and that he wasn't telling anybody that. that he was just putting it out there and that people should be able to think what they want. Catholic Church, of course, has never been okay with people thinking what they want. And yeah, you want to talk about going out like a badass? Finally, after 7 years of negotiation, they said, this is it. You will renounce your teachings or you will be executed as a heretic. And his final statement was, when they pronounced the death sentence, they said, you will be hanged, you will be killed as an unrepentant heretic, which is worse than a repentant heretic. He said, perhaps you pronounce this sentence with more fear than I receive it. Because he didn't give a flying fuck. So he was gagged, stripped naked, and burned upside down at the stake as an unrepentant heretic. There was a backlash that the Catholic Church was not counting on. A whole lot of people were like, you motherfuckers. You just killed this guy. And unfortunately for the Catholic Church, the narrative that he was killed because of his cosmological beliefs took hold almost immediately. When, if you look at what he was convicted of at trial, he was convicted of heresy against the Trinity, heresy against the sanctity of heaven, and heresy against communion. That's what he was convicted of. Nothing in his trial, actual conviction, says anything about the cosmological stuff. They had, at that point, they were willing to let all that go if he would just renounce his teachings on, yeah, forgive me, right? That the classic Christian thing, like, oh, you don't like what I said, so forgive me? Yeah, no, they weren't into that. But this backlash, this is likely what saved Galileo's life 33 years later. Because it was remembered what happened when they put Bruno to death. And so when they put Galileo on trial, there was a genuine fear that people were going to react the same way. And it is very possible that that is why Galileo was not convicted of heresy, was that they did not want a Bruno situation. Bruno had become a martyr for science. Even though, again, as the Catholic Church would try to point out for the next 400 years, and if you ask Catholics about it today, they will still tell you that he was not executed for his heresy about, scientific matters. He was executed for his heresy against the church, and even people that are Bruno fans will also admit it's because he was kind of a dick about it. But that's okay, because when you're right, you get to be a dick. So that is Giordano Bruno, our homie, and the very first member of our Heretics Hall of Fame. So, GB, this one's for you, buddy. Pour one out for GB today. Go tell someone they're wrong and be a dick about it in honor of him. So, that brings us to the next part of our sermon today. We should. Well, he's got a pretty dope statue is there in Italy right at the site where he was executed. And, the church did not like that statue going up, but they can't do shit about it. So now, we're moving in to our Gnostic Gospel series. Again, I don't know a ton about this stuff. We're going to learn together. So I decided we should start with the single most important event in Christian history, and let's look at it from a Gnostic point of view. I'm, of course, talking about the Gospel of Judas. Yeah, you never seen Judas represented as a saint, right? Well, there was a whole group of people back in the day that they thought that Judas was the bee's knees. And it was not until much later that he was, vilified. He was the true villain of that story. Oh, Bale, I'm sorry you don't get to stick around, but you got to keep the wife happy. Otherwise, you're going to end up like GB, and we don't want that. So, the Gospel of Judas. What the hell is the Gospel of Judas? It is that ratty-ass manuscript right there. They were found in a pile of Coptic documents in the 1970s. It took a long time to translate it. Stuff was missing, but the copy that exists today was written between 240 and 340 CE and was very likely a translation of a Greek text from the mid-2nd century. That is when they believed that this was written, was sometime around 130 to 160 is generally thought to have been the time that this document was written. So if you're keeping score at home on your Bible timeline, that's about 90 years after the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John were written. We think those were written around 70, 80 AD. Basically about 35 to 40 years after Jesus died, somebody wrote those down. Well, another about 90 years later, somebody wrote this down. That's as far back. There could have been an earlier version of it. It's entirely possible that it was written the same time, but language techniques and words that were used, sentence structure, gives us the belief that it was a little bit later than the others. It was controversial from the minute, from the jump. Like the second this came out, it was at odds with pretty much everyone else in Christianity. But clearly, the fact that a copy of it survived this long means that there had to have been a lot of copies of it. There were probably a lot of people that were into this. Now, let's take a minute and talk about this. There was no Bible back then. Jesus dies in allegedly 33 AD, CE, whichever one you want to use. Jesus dies then. Takes about another 30 to 40 years before someone, allegedly Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, writes down his story and the story of his life. And those texts kind of codify the Jesus myth, his ethos, if you will. Well, there was no Bible. Nobody compiled all those texts. You basically read whatever you had access to. And everybody got in on the game. There was fan fiction everywhere. Everybody wrote down their interpretation of Jesus' teachings. And what was super common at the time was to ascribe it to someone from the Jesus story. So there's the Gospel of Thomas is one of the Gnostic texts. There's almost no chance that doubting Thomas, the guy that allegedly said he needed to put his fingers in the holes in Jesus' hands to believe that Jesus had actually come back from the dead, and so Jesus showed up and said, "Finger me, bro." Yeah, that story. That guy didn't write that book. He almost assuredly didn't write that book. But whoever wrote it was like, hey, people will take this way more seriously if I assign if I say that it was written by this guy who was there in the stories. So it was a way to add credibility. Just like there's a real good likelihood that Matthew, Mark, Luke may not have been written by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's a really good chance that the Gospel of Judas wasn't written by fucking Judas. It was written by somebody offering an alternative perspective on the story, and they figured if they assigned the writing of this story to Judas, that it would make more sense. So eventually, you had all these manuscripts flying around, and as we've talked about again in our timelines, it took a couple hundred years for the church to really take shape and kind of gain power, which it did. And when it did, the church decided, we got to have a unified book, a document that we say these are the right ones, because a lot of these texts, these Gnostic Gospels, were at total odds with one another. And you couldn't have a unified religion if you don't have an agreed upon set of beliefs. And so they decided these are the beliefs that we're going with. They get to become the Bible. The Nicene documents, as you were. They kind of point to a very specific interpretation of Jesus' life and message. And if you say that those are, you got to get those controlled documents in order. Exactly. You got to decide, hey, these are good. This is canon. These are bad. This is heresy. It was that simple. And so a lot of these documents have about as much veracity as the documents that you know as the Bible. That's, I think, my big point here, is just because this flies in the face of everything that was written in the Bible doesn't make it nonsense. It means that there were a lot of people that believed this at the time and were eventually told that they were wrong and that they weren't allowed to believe that, and if they did, they were heretics. And again, so the clampdown from the Catholic Church has been happening for quite some time. The papacy started in the 5th century and really hit its zenith in the 11th century, when that was the very first time that the Pope ever declared that a king could no longer be king because God said so. That was kind of the peak of papal power. 1076, Pope Gregory stated that Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire had lost his divine mandate to rule.
Praise hail and praise Dale.
Kurt Cummings, welcome to the party. And he had stated that Italy and Germany were no longer under the rule of Henry IV because God had revoked his mandate, and that not only were Christians no longer to recognize him as their king, but that it was an affront to God that he sat on the throne, and that Christians had to rise up and throw him out. That was when the papacy really had peaked. Right around the time they executed our buddy Bruno from the first story, yeah, that was when the papacy started to lose its power, and it was still an influential, powerful entity. But around then, thank you, Kurt. But around then is when monarchs started going, we have armies, fuck these assholes. And started that's when you start, it became vogue again for kings and queens to say, hey, I'm the head of the church here, not that asshole in the silly hat. Because that asshole with the silly hat had way too much power for about 500 years in there, where kings and queens walked on eggshells. But I'm digressing. Let's get back into Judas. So, who was Judas Iscariot? I feel like if, this guy, you ask anybody who's at all religious, they know the guy. Judas was, he's the scapegoat, right? He's the betrayer. It's become synonymous with betrayal. You call somebody a Judas, even if the person isn't religious, we all know what that means when you call somebody a Judas. But is that even fair? Do we know anything else about this guy? We know that Luke was a doctor. We know that Matthew and Mark started as fishermen. Like, what do we know about this guy? We don't know a lot. It's almost like he's a character there just to take the fall. We don't even know what Iscariot really means. Likely, it denotes that he was from a city called Kerioth. We know that at one point it mentions that there was a man from Kerioth. We believe that Iscariot means that he came from there. But there have been some other interpretations. One of the more interesting ones, though likely not true, is that it actually meant that he was a Sicarii. The Sicarii were were Hebrew, basically terrorists. There's no other way to call it. They carried curved knives, and they were famous for getting real stabby with anybody who wasn't all about Jewish freedom. They were known for murdering Roman leaders. They would murder Jewish sympathizers to the Roman occupation. These guys were hardcore. These guys initially loved Jesus because they were like, hell yeah, this guy's coming to free the Jews. He's coming to lead the uprising. We're in. And they got very disillusioned when, the idea that Jesus had just been a teacher. The only problem with that interpretation is that the Sicarii generally in history were thought to have started about 20 years after this story. The Sicarii really kind of came about in 50, 60 CE. So Judas already being one at, 20, 30 CE seems far-fetched. Not impossible, but far-fetched. His alleged actions have been used as an excuse for anti-Semitism for centuries. We have to talk about it. Maybe he was a time traveler. I actually love that interpretation. But yeah, it's just from Mel Gibson to everyone else. People have used Judas betrayed Jesus, it's Judas' fault Jesus died, as an excuse to shit on Jews since the dawn of time. Like, it's been going on. And yet, those same people seem unwilling to admit that if Judas doesn't do what he did, then Jesus doesn't get crucified, and if he doesn't get crucified, he can't die for your sins, you can't go to heaven. So it's like your own canon works against you, but they don't ever like that. And there will be some apologists who will say that, well, Judas is the one that did it, though. Jesus did have to die, but Judas didn't have to betray him. He had the option to betray him, and he chose to, so that's why he's the bad guy. Somebody else could have been the villain. But that doesn't really help the thought that somebody apparently has to be the villain in God's plan. Kind of Pharaoh hardens his heart all over again. Like somebody has to be the asshole. And that doesn't really sound like free will to me. So let's look at the reasons that Judas did it. Why did Judas do it? Why did he betray Christ? Was it for the money? It's almost as if they want to hate people, Kurt. So some have posited Judas did it for the money. Of course, we know the famous 30 pieces of silver. That if you read Matthew or Mark's telling of the tale, they're at the Last Supper. Jesus says to Judas, what you're going to do, go do quickly. And Judas runs off and tells the Sanhedrin, hey, I can deliver Jesus to you. And they say, hey, we'll make it worth your while. He says, okay. They give him 30 pieces of silver. He goes and gives Jesus the Judas kiss, as we know, and calls him rabbi. And that's how they know that that's Jesus, he's the one, and that Judas is saying that Jesus is teaching, which Jesus was not technically a rabbi by the rabbinical standards, which means he shouldn't be teaching. He's violating Jewish law. It's a whole scene. Matthew definitely seemed to feel that the 30 pieces of silver were a big deal. He kind of really harps on that it's about the money for him. Other people, some scholars, question whether money had anything to do with this story, and that if Matthew was just using it as a parable about greed, that the 30 pieces of silver doesn't really seem like that, it didn't seem to make sense to some people. And then this is where you get a little bit of difference in stories. Matthew also states that Judas tried to give the money back. After Jesus is arrested and taken, Judas goes back to the men who paid him and says, I don't want this money. I've done something wrong. And he's racked with guilt about what he did. He tries to give the money back. The priests tell him, we can't take the money back. That's blood money. It's spoiled. We don't want it anymore. The Apostle Paul writes that Judas spent the money himself. That Judas took the money and he went and bought a tract of land with it. And that when he did that, he bought the tract of land and he went out to survey the land, that he exploded, basically. That, seriously, he fell to the ground and his stomach exploded open. Whereas most people know the story that Judas went and hung himself. And that, the way Matthew tells it, Judas threw the money down, hung himself from a tree, and that the priests came and took the 30 pieces of silver and they bought the field where Judas hung himself and buried his body there, and it became known as the Field of Blood because it had been paid for with blood money. Some people reconcile that when the Apostle Paul was saying that Judas exploded, that was because he was hanging from the tree for a while. He hung himself, eventually the rope broke, he fell to the ground, and then splattered all over the place as he had been decomposing hanging in the tree. Either way, not a great end for Mr. Iscariot. Judas, who looked exactly like Ian McShane, dropped the money and hung himself. That's what Mel Gibson would like us to believe. So, that was it for the money? Maybe. That's one view. Some people say it was for the culture. If you believe that he was a Sicarii, then it would make a lot of sense. Because, there are some scholars that maintain Judas misunderstood Jesus' point. Judas was convinced that Jesus was going to free the Jews by starting a literal rebellion against the Romans. And that when it became apparent to him that Jesus was not going to do that, Jesus was not going to start an actual uprising and throw the Romans out, that he became disillusioned and decided that They needed somebody more charismatic at the head of this movement, somebody who actually wanted a revolution, not this guy that wanted everybody to love each other. If you go with the Sicarii interpretation, then this makes more sense as to why he did what he did. But if you read the Gospel of Judas, which is what we're here to talk about, it takes a little different tone. The Gospel of Judas states that Judas was the only disciple who actually understood Jesus' message. I think this is important to talk about. Silly Judas. So, the Gospel of Judas is heretical in just about every fun way it could be heretical. And one of its main things that it teaches is that the whole idea of Jesus sacrificing himself on the cross had nothing to do with salvation. Jesus, according to the Gospel of Judas, had said, look, dude, you got to find the God within. That's why I paired this with Bruno. The Gospel of Judas pairs very nicely with Giordano Bruno's philosophies. That you find heaven within yourself. You find God within yourself. That you are made in God's image. You have the power of God within you. You have to look inside yourself and unlock it. And be a good person. And do good things. And manifest all the good parts of humanity in yourself. And that when you do that, if you do that well, when you die, you will be reabsorbed into the cosmic consciousness of God, where you will find true transcendence and peace. If you don't do it right, you will die, and that will be the end. No hell, no eternal damnation, just you die, and you don't get reabsorbed, because you never found the God within. That is what the Gospel of Judas states was Jesus' actual message, and that Judas was the only one that got that. That the rest of the disciples were obsessed with the idea of substitution because that was Jewish belief. That's how the Jewish religion worked. You sacrificed an animal, and that animal's blood paid for your sins. The animal died so you didn't have to. It's a substitutionary belief system. And that Jesus was going to be the ultimate sacrifice. That actually computed to these guys. That made sense because it took the framework of the religion that they had been commonly using, and it just entered into human sacrifice. But no, that's totally not creepy. But this interpretation in Judas, it's turning that completely on its head and saying that the idea of, sacrificing an animal or a person is nonsense, and that why would God want that? Like, the Gospel of Judas really kind of makes God as this kind of like intelligent, elevated being who's like, the fuck would I want that? Why would I want you to kill stuff? Well, no, I'm not about killing stuff. Kind of like that guy better. I don't know about you. It claims that God is a pillar of light that exists in a place outside of time and space. This is my favorite part of the Gospel of Judas. That there are lesser gods that inhabit our corporeal plane, like maybe a big fucking space dragon. And over time, humanity lost touch with the Spirit of God within them. In the book of Judas, he talks about God, this pillar of light that exists outside of time and space. That he creates the earth, and he creates a perfect being named Adas. And Adas is a perfect being. He gives Adas a flesh suit to wear and sends him to Earth. When that happens, Adas loses his memory of being a perfect being. It is big fucking space dragon positive. Yeah, so he sends this being to Earth, and that being becomes Adam, as we know him. But Adam does not remember that he's divine. Adam doesn't know what he is. And so the angels come and they try to help take care of him and, try to help him the only way Adam can come back and be reabsorbed into God, the big pillar of light that exists in his own dimension is to realize that that's what he is and to understand. But Adam doesn't remember. And that all, as more humans are born, as Adam has children and people go on, they get further and further and further away from understanding that they have God within them and that all they have to do is awaken it to be able to go back to paradise. It's a pretty cool fucking mythos, actually. And that all the strife and sadness and anger and bad feelings and all of that shit, that's not God's fault. God didn't create that. And it's not the devil's fault. The devil is not this malevolent being that's here thwarting God at every fucking turn. No. All of that is because our inner soul, that bit of God, desires to get back to the dimension outside time and space. But we don't remember how. We don't know how to do it. And we don't even, some of us don't even know that that's inside of us. And yeah, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the gospel says that God does not want or need sacrifices. God is about enlightenment, and understanding him will allow you to be one with him. Jesus' death merely was a fulfillment of prophecy that appeased these lesser gods. These lesser gods that exist on our plane, they wanted sacrifices, they wanted substitution, and Jesus decided, you know what, I'll throw them a bone. I'll do the thing. Also, Jesus, by accepting that and doing that, understood that he could be absorbed back into the collective consciousness. That was how he could get back into his pillar of light dad, was through accepting the sacrifice. So he wasn't, being sacrificed on the cross to save to save us from our sins. That's not what he was doing it so he could go home. That was his ride home. And so, if you go with the Gospel of Judas, Jesus asked Judas, he's like, bro, I got to get out of here. These people aren't listening. They're not learning. You're the only one that gets it. I got 12 guys together to carry on my message, and you're the only one who fucking gets it. I'm out of here. Can you help me out? This is going to be a big ask, but I need you to betray me. And it's the ultimate sacrifice. You're going to be thought of as a pariah. You're going to be cursed. But I need you to do it for me, bro. I need you to help me out so that I can get home. And so Judas does it and is immediately stricken with guilt and kills himself as a result. Because he betrayed his best friend. According to the Gospel of Judas, Judas was just doing what he was asked. And he was asked to do the hardest thing ever. He was asked to betray his friend. This gospel does take a side on the divinity of Jesus. It states that Jesus was divine in the lesser God way. That we are all God. But that Jesus understood it. Jesus was the enlightened one, and that we could all basically achieve Jesus-like status if we understood the God within. So it makes Jesus divine and not divine at the same time. Like, that we could all become divine. That was the whole point of what he was trying to do, was help us understand our own divinity. And nobody was listening because everybody was obsessed with sacrifices and atonement, which is what the big fucking space dragon wanted. And everybody missed out that the pillar of light that exists outside of time and space, we call him El, it's our divinity. Yes. It's honestly, it's a fascinating read. You can find it for free online and read the Gospel of Judas. I think it's like 16, 18 chapters or something. It's not real long. It's fascinating. I would tell you, go on, read it if you want. It's really interesting. Now, there's a couple different translations. National Geographic did the most famous one in about 2006, but there's a lot of people that claim that the National Geographic one took a lot of liberties with some of the sections that they didn't. That, the translation was hard to figure out, or there were little words missing, because as you saw the picture I showed, the text was kind of ratty. Take it with a grain of salt. if you're gonna nitpick, I think it's funny that people nitpick over that translation, but yet they're like, nah, the Bible totally translated perfectly. Everything makes sense. And you're like, what about these 8 billion things that conflict each other? They're like, no, shut up. It's perfect. But this is a wrong translation. Why do they do that? Because it flies in the face of their silly beliefs. Because it posits a different world where Jesus doesn't, we don't owe God anything. God just wants us to wake up. I think that's a pretty cool message because I think we'd all be better off if we stopped worrying about what we owe God and woke the fuck up. Not acted woke, but actually woke the fuck up. So, the next time you think about Judas, maybe he did it for the money. Maybe he did it for the culture. Or maybe he did it because his best friend asked him to. So, the next time you see a villain, ask yourself, is that person really the villain? Or were they a necessary plot device in the story? Were they just helping their homie get home, even though it was going to destroy them? Because that's what real friends do. So maybe Judas was just a friend. And if so, thank you for being a friend. And thank you for being here this week. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll be back next week with our Halloween special episode. I'm not even going to tell you what it's about. It's going to be batshit insane, but it's going to be fun. And we will induct another person into our Hall of Heretic Heroes. So thank you for being here. Take care of each other. And as always, may the big fucking space dragon look out for you. Thanks for hanging out, everybody.